All right. At the end of the first, you ready to roll? Okay. At the end of the First World War, the main nations of Europe were looking around and deciding that maybe semi-automatic would be the next place to go. But at the same time, they really weren't ready to spend a lot of money because they had just fought the war to end all wars and were in deep hot. So starting in the 1920s, there was a lot of research and development into developing a semi-automatic battle rifle. The two main countries that were very, very serious about it, every country did some research. The two that were serious were the United States and the Soviet Union. And in the case of the United States, they even considered reduction in caliber to more of a 7mm round, a .276. And there were competing designs, which is in all countries, you get competing designs. You just don't go to one guy and say, go invent us a new battle rifle. So in the United States, the two big designers were Pederson and Garand, okay? Which everybody calls Grand, okay. Now, they fooled around, they competed against each other, again, trial rifles, experiments, and everything else. And they were pretty happy with a .276 when Douglas MacArthur, who was chief of staff, said, no, it's got to be in .30-06. We're not going to reduce the caliber. We've got machine guns in that caliber. We got a stock of .03 rifles. We got 17 Enfields that are in war reserve. Whatever you're doing, it's got to take the old .30-06 round, which we also have lots of. So the work went out, and we're going to see that in most countries, in all three countries, they made the same mistake in the beginning. They first developed rifles that use what was called the bang system, B-A-N-G, after the guy invented it. It's a gas trap. It catches the gases as they leave the barrel to work the mechanism. And in the United States, they worked on the gas trap method. And in the beginning, they thought they had it down right. You know, it's going to work great. And just when they were about to start production in 1936 or so, there were complaints to Congress. No, there's a better system. That's the Johnson recoil system, which is later on a Johnson Model 1941. And that they're making a big mistake in going to this new rifle. Well, Springfield Armory wanted to show off their new rifle in 1936. They stopped all production of .03 Springfields in 1936 and started producing the M1. And they were ready to do a giant show and tell at Camp Perry when they ran into a problem called a 9th round stoppage. The gun would jam after 7 round stoppage. And they couldn't figure out what was happening. But then they realized if the top cartridge was on the left, there was no problem. If the top cartridge was on the right, you got your 7th round stoppage. And that had not happened with the prototypes. And to play it safe, they repackaged the ammunition to make sure all the ammunition had the top round on the left-hand side. Had people come to Camp Perry, had different shooters from all over the country, tried a new service rifle, and there was no problem. Then they went back and tried to figure out why did it happen when the round was on the right. And what had happened was somebody at Springfield Armory had taken Garand's specifications, his drawings, everything else, and decided to make a minor change in the milling of the receiver. And to make it easier to mill the receiver, they did a certain cut that skimmed away some metal in the receiver that they felt was probably superfluous. It wasn't. And that was the problem. So they fixed it, but they still kept all production M1 ammunition is loaded in clips. The top round is on the left, which also is more convenient for us right-handed shooters in jamming it in. So the United States had developed a battle rifle for World War II, and they eventually went away from the gas port and drilled into the barrel and produced a gun that by 1940, late 1941, 42 is what we're used to seeing. And this rifle served for quite a while as compared to the others we're going to study from other countries. When I joined the New Jersey National Guard in 1972, spring of 72, my first drill was, we had just gotten M16s. The month before, the M1s had been packed up and sent away. So your M1 served for quite a while, okay? Now, It became the basis of the M14. People still use it. It's still reliable. It's a good gun, everything else. Parallel to our development in the Soviet Union, they too were doing experiments, and there, the two competing designs were Tokarev and Siminov. They were the two competing designers. And at first, Siminov seemed to have the lead. So in 1936, when we got the M1, the Russians got what's called the AVS-36. I think it's AVS-36, which had a gas check system, but was semi and full auto. And when they took it out for trials, they found out that having a lightweight gun like this in full automatic was not good. The dispersion was too great. The parts kept breaking. It just wasn't working out. So Stalin basically called them back in again and said, what's the story? And he was also a personal friend of Tokarev, who invented the handgun of the Soviet armed forces. So Tokarev convinces him that his gun is better. And his gun was known as the SVT-38, which I do not have here. 2,500 of them exist somewhere in the United States because the Finns captured them and sold them in the 1950s. I have seen two. And one was not for sale because it was promised to a family member, and the other one somebody had sporterized. Cut the stock, put a rubber recoil pad on it, threw away the cleaning rod that was on the side, ground off the bayonet lug. So
where is he buried?
Yeah. So I remember as a kid seeing the gun magazines, and they used to advertise Tokarev rifles so cheap even Nikita can buy one. And they had the SVT-38s or the SVT, your choice. And they were like $39.95 or something, okay? Yeah, now you're gonna pay a fortune. Anyway, they go to war against Finland. And all sorts of problems developed with the SVT-38. A lot of troops had trouble maintaining them. A lot of troops felt it was too heavy. A lot of the troops had trouble with the field stripping and cleaning it. And a lot of them were jamming. So what happened was, it seems there was a meeting at the Kremlin, and Siminov was invited back, and Stalin had a whole table full of jammed up SVT-38s, and he started pointing out all the problems. Okay? And he goes to Siminov, he goes, how come we didn't pick your rifle? And Siminov goes, you made that decision. And Stalin goes, you should have argued better. Okay? Anyway, it was too late to go back to the other gun, which really wasn't that good. And Siminov goes off and eventually invents the PTR anti-tank rifle and the SKS. Okay. Tokarev is basically assigned fixed a rifle. So he modifies it and creates what we have here, which is the SVT-40. All right? And they eliminated some wood, put some more metal up the front, bayonet lug, and strengthened the mechanism. And it became was going to be the infantry rifle of the Soviet armed forces. Most of the guns were sent to the east, Soviet east, facing Germany. And the goal was that 1/3 of the army would have SVTs and the others would still have Mauser Garand until such time as they could really, really produce enough guns. What happened though was the Germans invaded, and a good portion of the SVT-40s that were there ended up being captured by the Germans. And the Germans took the guns and they liked it. They were starting to, they thought it was really a great gun and started, issuing manuals on it and everything else and writing reports that, hey, this is a real good rifle, why can't we have one, okay? Now, meantime, Finland entered the war after a while as a co-belligerent, not an ally. They didn't belong to the tripartite pact. They were a co-belligerent to get back some of the land that they had lost from the Russians in the Winter War. And most of the Tokarevs that collectors have, like me, like Brian there, are Finnish captured. And they have the SA mark, and a lot of collectors, they want these because they're the closest to the original issue of a Russian SVT-40. And for a long time, people said, well, they're the best because they were never reconditioned. Wrong answer. The Finns reconditioned all of them. Okay, that's why they mismatched numbers. They reconditioned them, put them into service. Sometimes they took the gas mechanism out and used them as straight poles. And in the 1950s, they sold them to Interarms. And Interarms imported into the United States in the 1950s 2,500 SVT-38s and 15,000 SVT-40s. And they still pop up at gun shows. The SA. The way you spot them is the brake bolt. Okay? And when I was a young collector, you could never get original slings or bayonets for them, for whatever reason. The Finns just sold the rifle as it is, no sling, and for whatever reason, either they didn't have the bayonets or didn't want to send them. If you got one, you know, this is what you got. Then in the late 1990s, with the fall of the Soviet Union, countries like the Ukraine and other Warsaw Pact nations went into their warehouses and found a lot of reconditioned SVT-40s. Because at the end of the war, basically, the Russians decided this is not worth the trouble. But you might need them as a war reserve. So they were all sent out, reconditioned, and put away. And you can always spot them by the plumb bolt. Okay? And we'll go to the other things that you can do to identify them. But they brought the price down of an SVT-40, made it available and affordable. And then, unfortunately, Bill Clinton and Hillary found out that these semi-automatics were coming into the United States. And they convinced the Russian government not to send any semi-automatics to the United States. No SKS, no Tokarevs, no captured G43s, none of that stuff. So the ones that are here, you're not going to get any more, with the possible exception for a while, which people used to refer to, and I'm going to tell you right now, is it true? I don't know. I got the stories from people. Was the Canadian Underground Railroad. Canada allowed the importation of SVTs, all right? And they would go to Canada, and then people put it in the trunk of their car and drive to the Ohio gun shows. And that's how we ended up getting more of these. Now, when I went to buy this at Sarco, I was like, oh my God, I can get a real nice SVT, brand new almost. And I get home, and I'm looking at the paperwork, and I'm going, oh my God, they screwed up. Because the serial number on the gun was nowhere on the bill of sale. And I'm like, oh my God. So I got on the phone, I go, Glenn, I got to run back, you guys. He goes, no, we didn't. I said, well, I can see what a serial number is. He goes, that's not the serial number anymore. ATF decided that they weren't going to try to play games with Cyrillic letters. So they insisted that when a gun came in, if it had Cyrillic letters, it would get a new serial number. And the damn thing is hidden in the back here. It's like microscopic. You got to think a magnifying glass. And they gave it their own number. So when you get these guns, the serial number is going to be back here. The one on the left side receiver is the original number. But that's not the one that's in the records of the store or ATF or the importers. All right? Again, the M1 soldiered on after World War II to Korea, parts of Vietnam, National Guard. The SVT just seems to disappear after 1945. The gun that's going to replace it is going to be the SKS and later the AK-47. Now, during the war, they issued these to naval infantry and sometimes entire units, but basically, they even closed down the production line for a while of SVTs and made more Mosin Nagants. It just was not considered, desirable as a battle weapon. During the 1950s, when the Soviet Union and the United States in the Cold War were helping out our allies, we were giving away M1s to the Greeks, the Norwegians, the Danes, everybody. Tokarevs weren't being given away. They're just being stored. They gave them Mosin Nagants, and then in the late 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev changed the policy. He said, we're going to support wars of national liberation. We're not going to give our cast-off guns to people who want to spread communism. We'll give them quality, top-of-the-line stuff, like AK-47s, RPGs, whatever they need. We're not going to give away our cast-offs. So the Tokarev's war story is really 1940 to 1945. And then it just went into storage and became a collector's item in the United States anyway. They're neat guns to shoot. Again, there's three varieties you really need. The finish capture is what most collectors want to get their hands on. The rebuild, nice shooter, affordable. The third one is the unicorn. That's guns that were captured by the Germans on the Eastern Front, as they called it, that were brought by soldiers to the Western Front and got captured by Americans. Those guns tend to have all matching numbers, no finish marks, no import marks. They are rare. I run into two. And one was very expensive, did not have a magazine in it and everything else. It had bring-back papers even. I mean, the guy had real nice price tag on it. The other one, Big Lou, had it for a while. Somebody converted it to fire blanks, so he could play Russian soldier. I was like, all matching, original, had some kind of thing welded in the barrel, and fired blanks, all right? Now, the German soldiers were impressed with the Tokarev, and they liked it. But the German military was not that big on what kind of a battle rifle you're gonna have, because their doctrine was different. Their doctrine was the rifleman's job is to support the machine gun does the killing. The Americans was the rifleman does the killing, the job of the machine gun to support the rifleman. And somebody told me this story that in World War II, the joke was, if you see soldiers in the distance and you don't know what side they're on, fire a shot over their heads. If they're British, they're going to go to ground right away and engage you with long-range rifle fire. If they're Germans, they're going to go to the ground and open up with machine guns. If they're Americans, they're going to go to the ground, it's going to be quiet for 10 minutes, and then artillery is going to land all over your place. All right? So, whether that story is true or not, all right, the Germans start making the same mistakes that the Russians and the Americans make. They decide, we're going to use the bang system. We're going to use gas check. And they tell Mauser and Walther, that's their two competitors, we got Pederson and Garand, they got Tokarev and Siminov, they have Walther and Mauser to produce a semi-automatic rifle, but it cannot have a hole drilled in the barrel. It must catch the gas, a gas escape thing. So, they produced the Model 41, which doesn't really work right. And finally, they decide, just copy the Tokarev's mechanism and create what's now called the G43, and later on I'll explain the K43. Again, when I was a youngster, there was a program called Combat. And they would have this one, for dynamic purposes, you need a lot of gunfire. So it's easy with an M1, bang, 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 bang. An M1 carbine, bang, 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 or the Thompson. When you have the Germans shooting back, if you want dramatic, you got to have an MP40 or an MT42. Guys working their bolt action Mausers just doesn't cut it. But they had one guy in that platoon that had a G43. And I remember me and my other friends like, man, that's a neat gun. Got to get one of those. Because the guy would pop up the G, boom, 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 boom. All right? So I know when I was in the late 60s, me and my friends, we all wanted to get a G43. Gotta have a G43, man. So we can bang, 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 just like that. Okay. One of my friends, Glenn DeRuiter, he found an all-matching, beautiful G43. We go to the range, he fires 2 shots and it breaks. Matching part. Pays a gunsmith, I forget how much to weld it back. Goes back, breaks again. Goes to Sarco, buys the same part, sticks it in the gun, and keeps the other parts on the side. These things are rough. They just bounce back, and they throw brass like crazy. At our old range at Catswamp Road, when you fired it, your brass went flying to the right, and it was always dented in the front. I found out later that these guns just take a beating. And there's kits, if you want one of these and you shoot it a lot, there's kits that modify the gas mechanism that you can buy to cut down on that beating back and forth. All right? Now, below it is a this one here is made in 1943 in Berlin. Below it is a Walther made in 1945. And this is a G43, that's a K43. What's the difference? Same difference between a Ford Pinto and a Mercury Bobcat. Okay? All they did was they decided to change the name. It's a carbine. Doesn't take a bayonet, which was unusual. German infantry rifles usually took bayonets. It was never made with a bayonet. Okay, it's got a cleaning rod and carried some cleaning equipment in the buttstock. It's basic. They were all sent to the Eastern Front, fighting the Russian Western Front. And there's very few pictures, if you look on troops facing us at Normandy or Italy or anything else, with G43s. It's very hard to find one. That's where basically they were being sent. Now, the one thing that the Germans found useful for was they milled them so they could take a scope mount, okay? And they decided it would make a decent sniper rifle, which I'll get into. The Tokarev, the Russians wanted it to be a sniper rifle too, so they had these mills. This one doesn't have it, this is a late war, but it's got the notches here, but you have to cut another notch here. Okay, you can fake it, but the real ones, there's machined here and a Cyrillic letter is stamped into it. And if you were a successful sniper like Lyudmila Pavlichenko, they would award her an SVT with a scope. Because this is the high-end Soviet sniper rifle. They're crap. And she and all the other snipers were like, you can have it back, give me my Moisen. Okay? Because the gun is just not, the interaction between the receiver and the wood is just not good. You have to stick shims and everything else in there if you really want to get accuracy. And it's very bad on a cold bore shot. For whatever reason, the cold bore shot was way out of whack. Cold bore means the first shot out of a barrel hasn't been fired for a while. So the Tokarev as a sniper rifle was not a success, okay? So when you get to World War II, the M1C and the M1D didn't get out there till the war was really over. The Tokarev was not a good sniper rifle. The only decent semi-auto sniper rifle was the G43. All right? Now, when the war is over, I said the M1 soldier's on, the Tokarev gets put in storage. The G43, well, most of them have probably ended up in the Soviet Union where they're probably still sitting in a warehouse waiting for Charlie Steen to knock on the door. And what happened to the other G43s? Czechoslovakia. They grabbed all they could and made it their standard arm right after the war. As a matter of fact, this scope mount is from Czechoslovakia, and it came with the bottom rifle. The German markings have a line through them, ZF4, everything else. And the mount is an exact copy of the German mount, but the lettering for, forward or back and forth is in whatever Czech language, yeah, okay. And this became the standard Czechoslovakian sniper rifle, and the rifle itself was being used as their infantry rifle until the coup in 1947 when the communists took over, and when they became members of the Warsaw Pact, they were told, you got to make guns that use our ammo, not 8mm Mauser and things like that. So when the war was over, some of these guns ended up in Czechoslovakia. Some of them got exported to the United States before we had all kind of restrictions on buying guns from the Warsaw Pact. And of course, some of these guns came back as, duffel bagged. So G43s have just skyrocketed in price. Again, I'm going to just use as a reference. In 1968, you could buy a 98K for $30. A G43 would have been maybe 65 or 70. All right, yeah. Nowadays, a few times when I see G43s and they got thousands on them. So if you do get one, and you want to shoot it a lot. I don't know, I'll ask Will, we used to use 8mm Canadian in it, and it used to dent the front part of the neck when it flew out. Is there a way to correct that when you find the brass?
Well, you can take the dents and everything.
Okay, but we said, after a while, me and my friends, we would just use 8mm steel case, German Verdun prime, because we didn't care if it flew out into the woods and got dented. But it's an interesting gun, and again, at the end of World War II, US stayed with this, Russia got rid of this, and some of these that were in the Soviet bloc were given to police forces. The East German police carried G43s for a while. And I said the only nation that really used it was Czechoslovakia. It did not get a chance to get the development that these guns got. Again, by 1942, it's fixed. It's working. These, if you buy the later ones, a lot of times they have a thicker stock, but these used to break right at the wrist sometimes. I have another one at home that's got 2 wooden dowels in it. They also made some of these in full auto. And this stock is for a full auto. The safety would flip to the other side. And prior to when they changed, I'm trying to remember which gun law, probably 1984, Sarco used to sell the bottom mechanism for a full auto. So you could have just slipped it into an SVT, and if you had the right stock, you would have, you'd have a selective fire gun, but it'd be worthless because, again, with its lightweight, dispersion, go to jail for something, you know, you're gonna go to jail, go for something good like a 21 Thompson, you know, not a SVT converted to full auto again. Again, not much. All right, and after the war, we're gonna do another presentation later on this year. It's gonna be on the post-World War II semi-auto rifles, and far more extensive. Do I have any questions? Again, this was a short presentation because we didn't need much. Yeah, Rich?
Well, it's out of the room. Did you comment on the SKS?
Okay, the SKS. Okay. The SK, Siminov went to work on a rifle. The first thing that the Russians did is they looked around and said, got to get away from the 7.62 Russian rim. That's not going to work. So they developed their own cartridge, which we now call the 7.62 by 39, but for a while it was 7.62 by 41, whatever. They were fooling around. But they developed a cartridge in 1943 and said the next gun is going to have to be in this. And the other thing was the Russians had decided that Mosin Nagants and submachine guns, PPSH-41s and PPSH-43s, were perfectly adequate for combat as a team, you know. Submachine guns for close range, Mosin Nagants for longer range, and that there really wasn't a role for this gun. So they had captured some German assault rifles, Sturmgewehrs, and Siminov, okay, if you ever see the PTR anti-tank rifle, some guys go, well, that's a scaled up SKS. The SKS is a scaled down PTR. Okay. And in 1944, in the first Belarusian front, they sent out guns, prototypes, and tested them, and the reports came back, hey, this is great. So in 1945, they sort of decided right after the war that the SKS would be their semi-auto battle rifle of the future. But they didn't start large-scale production until 1947, and by 1954 they stopped because the SKS was to replace the Tokarev and the Mosin, and you know, and the AK was to replace the PPSH-41, PPSH-43, and after a while they're just looking at it and going, the AK can replace the SKS too. You know, we'll have one all-purpose rifle. We don't need a submachine gun and a rifle. The AK covers both roles. Yes?
What was the ammunition for the Russian and the German weapon?
Okay, the Russian rifle used the same ammunition as the Mosin Nagant, the 7.62 Russian rim, and it could be fed with stripper clips if you had to. They had a magazine that was detachable, but you could fit it with stripper clips. The G43s used regular German full-size 8mm Mauser ammunition, could also be loaded with stripper clips. And I think a German soldier was issued a magazine in the rifle, 2 in the pouch, and then he had extra ammo and stripper clips. So he had, you know, and 30 rounds in stripper clips, 2 magazines, 10 rounds each, and 1 10-round magazine in the gun. Again, you're saying 60 rounds of ammunition, combat load? You're probably carrying 3 belts of machine gun ammo. Yeah.
The bottom one.
Yeah.
Anybody ever been to Berlin? When there used to be the Berlin Wall, the Berlin, East Germans?
Yeah, East German police.
Used to carry that on the wall.
Yeah, the East German police had a variety of guns. They eventually were equipped just with AK-47s, but
I saw them carry that one. I didn't know what it was
Yeah.
at the time. I saw them that one.
anybody else? Any comments? Or Will, please.
I've loaded some 8mm for guys with the G43s. About a 60% load of 4895, functions very nicely, drops the brass close by, and doesn't break the guns.
Again, the 1943, the gun went put into production. 1945 was put out of production. So, it didn't really have a time to, go through and do, serious development and tweaking and everything else. Because by then, the war was over and they lost. Anybody else? Yeah,
Comment.
go.
The original SVT 40 mags are
Yeah.
going for about as much as I paid for the rifle.
Yeah, SVT magazines.
Mags.
Like I said, that one gun that I saw, it was Harrisburg Gun Show, didn't have a mag. And I said, and the guy said, oh, they're all over the place. And I'm like,
Repros are like.
Yeah, the repros, and a lot of them don't work right. And it's hard to find original mags. I was fortunate that when I got my first finished gun, the owner had already bought 2 original mags with it. So, I got it as a package deal. And I think I went to Sarco, and Glenn was like, I'll see what I can do. And he found 1 original magazine in the back somewhere. So I had a spare magazine, but that's definitely a problem. G43 mags are starting to be a pain to find too. I think I found one that's marked Denmark or something, Because there was a factory in Denmark that made magazines for the German army. And, after the war, it was still there, and they still had the dies and everything else. And I think Cummings and International Arms made a deal with him, make me some more magazines, And the guy goes, yeah, I still have the, the dies and everything else somewhere in the back of the warehouse, and they put them out and cranked them out because they seem to have gotten lost.
The German FG42,
Yeah,
an 8mm, was that a selective fire?
yeah. And that one fascinated. I remember when I was at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and the ordnance officers down there were telling me that they would study that gun because they said that was just such a fascinating design that they were thinking that the U.S. was actually thinking of doing something like that after the war. We went to the M14 because it met American manufacturing standards. In other words, we had the machinery, we could make it. Other nations went for the FAL and the G3 and things like that, but the United States was experimenting with the FG42. And I think there's a company that makes one now, but it's like an arm and a leg.
Yeah, that's right.
Or more.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried to stick to the the basics of, okay, the Japanese created an M1 rifle too, but the Navy did, but
So did
they,
the French.
yeah, it never got into any large scale production. Every nation, after the war, some nations just dusted off. I think the French just went and dusted off what they had developed before the war. Poland had a semi-automatic rifle too, but they only made about 100 of them. The Marcinek or something like that, I'm forgetting its name now. But they developed a real nice 8mm battle rifle, but it never went into production. Outside, I think it's 100, I think there was 100 copies made in Warsaw. And that caused an interesting event about a couple years ago. A guy who was a big Polish collector had one, and he decided he didn't want it anymore, and he advertised it for like, I think, $40,000. Knocked on the door. Hi, we're from Homeland Security. We're here to confiscate your rifle. Why? Polish government has told us it's a national treasure and it was stolen from them.
Oh.
By the Germans in World War II.
Yeah.
And they finally worked out a deal where the Polish government paid him $25,000, put it in their museum with a note that thanks to the efforts of Polish collector blah 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 Virginia, we have this rifle, in our collection.
They can't be coated, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, during World War I, the French fielded a semi-auto
Yes.
rifle, not the social.
No.
And at the end of the war, they shelved it.
Right,
Not for an apparent reason.
they disconnected the mechanism, made it a straight pull, and gave it to the Legion. And Bob McKinnon had one. And it took a special 6-round stripper clip of LaBelle ammunition or something. But again, it didn't hold up. And like I said, after the war, they converted into straight pulls, because Bob McKinnon was talking to me. He had to machine the parts that were missing so he could make it function in semi-auto again. And I remember them being advertised in service armament. I remember the ad, service armament in the 1960s. They had the French, there was 2 models. One took the standard LaBelle clip and one took a special clip.
And also in 1938, the French had a semi-auto that they were going to put into production just before the invasion. And like the FN, which was also developed before the war, the developers and the plans suddenly wound up in London.
I forget the guy's name. He smuggled himself out with all the machinist prints, plans, everything else. And I think and the ones for the Browning high power, they sent them over to Canada.
Yeah.
And they started producing high powers at the English factory.
Yeah.
The Swiss made the 7mm semi-auto for the Mexicans.
Yeah, the Montegrum. I think the Mexicans designed it and the Swiss made it.
Yeah,
And
and the Germans used them in the airplanes.
right,
With the drum magazine.
right. The semi-auto was going to be the future. I think everybody realized the semi-auto was the future. The question was, can you make one? What caliber? Okay, and how can you make it that's going to be reliable?
The Americans in World War I used a semi-auto also. It was given to pilots and whatnot to shoot at the German airplanes. And believe it or not, it was a Winchester Model
1970.
1907?
Yeah.
351.
When we had the Armistice Day shoot, I had a few people show up with them, so I created a special event for them. But they had them, and was it 351 Winchester, something like that?
Yeah.
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 Again, yeah, Rich.
And the Pederson device?
Oh, the Pederson device, yeah, the First World War, the Pederson device, convert your 03 to a semi-auto, even though it fired basically a 32 ACP type cartridge. Yeah, again, they knew that semi-auto was going to be the future. The question was, we were lucky. With the M1, we got a good semi-auto battle rifle that lasted and could take it. And the other countries, if they had more time, I'm sure they would have developed ones, and they just
Got the bugs out.
getting the bugs out. Right? Any new rifle, looks good on paper, looks good on the prototype. Then you got to produce them. Then you got to give them to the soldiers.
That's the test.
That's the test. Is the gun idiot-proof? Okay.
I have seen the M1 so many places all over the world.
Oh yeah.
Unbelievable. And this honor guard in Greece,
Yes.
and that's what they carry.
Yeah,
They carry the M1 Garand.
Right. The Danish drill team carries them. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure the Marine Corps silent drill team uses.
Yes.
And what they do is you can spot, if you look carefully, they cut the stock right there and trim it, so it's like the old 03.
Well, it's like
They also take the
guards
sights off.
that-
Yeah, they take the sights off, so they don't cut each other. But yeah, again, for competition, the M1 is going to probably hang around for quite a while, guys. Okay? I know Junior ROTC, Linden, which is near us here, their Navy team has M1s. We had the Marine Corps, we had M14s. And then they took the M14s away from us because
Got a picture of your door?
they were demilled, and then the Marines took them back so they could remill them and use them as designated marksman rifles. And we were given these dummy, made by Daisy 03 Springfields with plastic stocks, which is good because we used to order something like 50 M14 stocks every year because it broke. Give me another one. And I have some of the stocks. They're mint condition. They were beautiful. But people kept dropping guns and breaking stocks.
Birch or walnut?
Birch. And for some reason, they couldn't get the plastic ones, the fiberglass ones, which could take a lot more abuse. Really, people, this is, we cooperate here. We share information. Anybody else want to add anything on the G43, the Tokarevs?
The Garand was at Kent State.
Yeah.
In those riots.
Oh yeah, and one of the ones that was used is in the American Museum of History. If you go to Washington, D.C., they have an M1 with the evidence tag on it and everything else that was used at Kent State. Okay? I know when after it happened, there was, all kind of jokes, the Kent State intelligence test. If you throw rocks at a man with an M1, you show you have no intelligence, But that was sad because of the 4 people shot, 2 were 100 yards away, just walking to school, walking to class. The gun was totally inappropriate for that kind of a mission. A 30 caliber battle rifle, big boy.
Yeah, but you remember right in the report, they found all other calibers in the report too, around the place.
Oh, yeah.
Not just 30 caliber, they found everything.
Yeah. Oh, one officer, I think it was one officer in NCO, pulled out his .45 and was pointing it. I don't know whether he fired it or not.
Well, they found out all kinds of different calibers.
Yeah. But I said the M1, it's a good target rifle. Now, here's the problem you're going to probably run into, with the anti-gunners. We can't allow weapons of war. They had Beto O'Rourke again in Texas. We're gonna buy your AK or your AR. What if I don't want to sell it? He doesn't go into that. Now, does he still want to confiscate those guns? Probably.
Send it to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
They might get a good audience there.
Yeah. This is a weapon of war. Yeah. So it is. If you're going to outlaw AR-15s, AKs, your next argument can be weapon of war.
We've
Weapon of
already
war.
done with the
Weapon
M1
of war.
Karabin.
Don't want anything
Brown
semi.
Your brown vest. Weapon of war.
Right.
You don't hunt deer with a brown
If you want
vest.
to go into that, all weapons are weapons of war.
Yeah, that's right.
You use what you got.
You got, they were weapons of war. At one time, they were weapons of war. Yes, absolutely.
A bayonet is a weapon of war.
Yeah. Now, it was interesting on bayonets. I'm glad I forgot all about that. When the Tokarev started showing up in the United States in the 1950s, you could not get a bayonet. You could not get a bayonet. It was only after the other ones started coming in that bayonets started popping up. And so, I have 3 talks, and each one has a bayonet, but the bayonets were only obtained in the last couple of years. You couldn't get a bayonet for some reason. The Finns just didn't, either kept them for hunting knives or whatever. And as far as slings are concerned, if you have one, the sling for the PPSH-41 is the sling for the Tokarev. It's a carrying strap, that's all. It's not a shooting aid. Again, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, the sniper, she did not like it at all. And she was awarded one. This prime example of Soviet, ingenuity. No, give me back my Moisen. The German snipers liked the G43 because it was you didn't expose your action. And I guess there was adequate accuracy. Germans were not big into sniper rifles until middle of the war. As a matter of fact, they had sold off all they had gotten rid of all their sniper rifles back in 1938. Because you don't need them in a blitzkrieg. Don't need them in a blitzkrieg. We're going to be moving too fast. We're not going to be stopping. And then along came Leningrad and Stalingrad. And they had to start their sniper schools again and get scopes and everything else. But in the beginning of the war, their attitude was, sniping is for trenches, and we're not going to do that. So they then had to readjust in the middle of the war, create sniper schools and sniper rifles. And the G43 was one of the ones that they used. Anything
So
else?
who was the best sniper outfit in World War II? The Brits?
Probably, yeah. Your number 4T, that was a precision gun. I mean, everything going for it. Holland took, accurate rifles and made them more accurate and everything else. The mass-produced ones were the Soviets. The Soviets were the most serious snipers. They produced 50, 60,000 Moisins with scopes. They saw it as a valuable tool. Japanese snipers really weren't trained. It was just, here's a rifle, go climb a tree, tie yourself in, Americans didn't have sniping schools either. It was, here's a sniper rifle, find the most best shot in your platoon or company and give it to them. That was it. All right, anything else? Again, guys, chance to share. If not, some of you have wives, some of you have girlfriends, you have to get home, I don't know.
Some have both.
Huh? On that boat?
No, I said some have both.
Some have both, okay? Get in trouble that way.
To the ladies, wives and girls.
Never meet, right. Okay, guys, thank you very much. That's it.